So we both have work in the show, if you haven't seen the show. So the way we set up this talk is I think we're both going to show pictures of our work, and it's going to maybe flow a little more organically than a Q&A.
Yeah, we don't have an institutional figure
To direct us.
We're free floating. Yeah.
But since your pictures are first, I think one thing that I automatically wonder about is your decision to pursue so rigorously the cyanotype
Yes.
as an object.
Yeah.
If you could just talk about that process.
Yeah. And maybe how I arrived.
Yeah.
Well, just to give some context, maybe before we start talking about specific pieces, these are installation shots from another recent exhibition I did in New York this summer at a new space called Longhouse Projects. But basically I did not say no to this once I walked into the room, and it really allowed me to kind of summarize the last 2 years of this research. And I actually began this project in 2010, but it took me almost a year to figure out the technical aspects of it. So no one really saw anything until 2012, or 2012. But I came to this, I guess, through a series of other processes and decisions and evolution that took place in my work. And I guess when we were talking yesterday, I thought of two things that I think are very important in terms of understanding maybe why I shifted towards this. I still myself don't completely know why, but that's kind of when I have that kind of ambiguity, I know something's right for me anyway. But I guess in graduate school, I read a pretty important essay in terms of my own development. It's not really an essay, it's actually an artist statement by Jeff Wall. It's called Photography and Liquid Intelligence. And it's actually an artist statement. I wish I had an example, I wish I had a photograph, but for Jeff Wall's photograph, Milk. I don't know if you guys see head shaking. I know Aspen probably read it. But in it, it's a really, I give it to students a lot because it's simply so strange and almost, I think, mystical in terms of how he, and surprising for Wall, because he's always usually such a dry, kind of pragmatic thinker. And this was like the essay that he was probably, drinking while he was writing. I mean, it's just kind of contrary to his usual mode of thinking. But essentially what I found important about this for myself was that he divided photography into, Wall talks a lot about dialectic in his work, things that are seemingly opposite that actually are feeding upon one another and kind of creating, the experience. But he divides photography into the dry part and the wet part. And the dry part really being the optical system. The fact that, just like in our brains, the image enters upside down. And there's really no deviation from that. It's a law of physics, essentially. And in that, for him, I think, and maybe how I also interpreted that might extend towards the rational and the institutional and maybe the certain. And that part of photography that we associate with observation, so, truth too. And then the other side, of course, is the liquid side, which he frames as something much more irrational. And he calls it an archaism, I think, in that water plays such a key role in chemistry and just how the medium, in the darkroom, how a photograph traditionally anyway comes into being. But what's even stranger is he then connects it to older processes of mining ore and other types of moments in human history where water and handwork and the unknown, alchemy, kind of plays a role. So that really struck me. And at the time I was making, well, I'm not making play, that's Barbara. I don't know what I was doing back then, but and I was shifting towards, yeah, still have those. But at the time, I was kind of revisiting modes that I was really invested in much earlier in my life when I was a very teenager, basically, which was returning back to photography, landscape photography, and like many, white guys in our generation, 4x5 camera and walking through the world. And but even photographing landscape, I was interested in somehow showing something that wasn't necessarily about what the viewer was experiencing, but maybe spoke or pointed towards a kind of interiority, And I was looking at Charles Birchfield at the time, the modernist painter, and thinking about walls. So that definitely played into the thing I did right before this, which was the anthotype. And I apologize, I don't have any examples to show you guys today, but while I was kind of developing this and pulling my hair out over it in 2010, I did this other process that was basically a precursor to the first photographic process. It was part of the very preliminary experiments performed by Sir John Herschel, who also invented the cyanotype. But what struck me about, well, actually it was a series of coincidences. I'm being very tangential as usual, so please stick with me. But I was out in the woods one day photographing, and my father was with me, and he pointed out pokeberries to me in the wood, and he kind of made a joke like, "Don't eat those are poisonous." And it reminded me of something I read about Herschel in these anthotypes. And Herschel, like a lot of the early inventors of the medium, he had his hands in a lot of different other areas of study, the photochemistry of light, and he was actually a really accomplished botanist too. In fact, he was, I think he was in kind of, that's how the Anna Atkins thing happened with cyanotype. But what struck me about Herschel was that he thought looking at photosynthesis and the garden was going to be a metaphor in a way for inventors to resolve fixing an image, that he thought there was this relationship. And I thought, by today's standards, probably pretty irrational hypothesis, but an interesting one. So I made anthotypes for a while, and those, I don't have an example of those today, but they're abstractions, and I made them abstract because I thought, well, they kind of were invented before photography was actually a thing. So they're kind of images that feel like they're coming into being. They're not really images yet.
So can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
Because I was just thinking about pre-visualization as being part of your process. Like it seems to me you're maintaining this tension between the subjects you depict, the images that appear, and then the photograph as a process, or a photograph as a meditation on its own making.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting tension because it requires pre-visualization. It requires knowing something about the system you're about to subject an experience to, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like your process is so long. I mean, you describe archaeology almost.
Yeah.
And it's like you start with the digital capture. I mean, you start before that by collecting, like in the case of the fossils, you collected these with your father and held on to them.
Yeah.
And they made their way into this system you created to generate sort of images.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the work really strikes me in your process, is as being sort of depicted but also illustrative of a type of concealment.
In terms of the production?
Like the concealment of what the subject actually is. Right? Like I can look at your pictures and say, I'm looking at pictures of hands or rope or fossils. But what I feel is that I'm looking at a kind of time-lapse experience of some materials and chemistry.
Yeah.
And I don't want to hijack it.
Yeah, no. I think that brings up a good point. I mean, first of all, I have this science types are very different than what I was doing with landscape or the geometric abstraction I was doing around the same time. Yeah,
There's less control in the process, right, than the earlier stuff.
there's no, I mean, this is not a process designed for fine printing, but one of the interesting things I've discovered, this is truly, these are Prussian blue, chemically, this is in the show, but the chemicals that go into making this are also the chemicals that are in Prussian blue watercolor, so or oil paint. So there's something very basic and kind of common. I don't know where I think I just lost my train of thought. What was your? What were you trying?
Well, I just noticed because like the title of the show you did in the first installation shot was a priori, so it made me think about
Prior
something else.
knowledge.
Right.
Yeah.
It's implicit in the process, and of course, chemistry, and go back to the wall essay, like the presence of water is in photography, even though now much of what we look at has no water in its production, right? Typically,
Yeah.
it's like all.
Well, he even said pushed to the far borders. I mean, there's inkjet. There's still water.
But so I guess maybe a question is like, why do you want to keep water as part of your process?
Well, I think that's a good. Well, by the way, in terms of water, these are aquatic fossils. By the way, they're Devonian fossils that were harvested outside of Buffalo, New York, but they at one time, including where we are right now, we were under an ancient ocean. But water, I think what struck me most was him talking about the archaism and being involved in the process that we are in a time when photography, any advancement in the medium, often from a technical or representational standpoint, has to do with getting closer and closer to this hyper reality, this hyper way of seeing. And I guess I wanted to use my hands, and that process does kind of become a space for meditation because this is I do a lot of waiting around and I think about what's going to come next and about my life, that kind of stuff. But with water, I think a lot of the images kind of reference complex natural forms. The ropes were kind of automatic compositions that were accomplished by throwing rope on the ground and photographing it into the computer, just randomly assembling parts to make a whole, and the chains were the same way. The hands on the other hand, make a pun. They were different. I mean, they came from a couple points of inspiration, but mostly I teach in art schools, and I taught in a foundation program for a couple of years. Actually, I taught drawing recently in the last 3 years. But this is an exercise we give to a student, basic drawing student, about basic observational drawing exercise that's supposed to kind of get the student into the act of observing and in representation. And I just walking up and down the halls, I saw drawings that looked like this, which actually, albeit also remind me of the Sarkowski essay from, what is it called?
Photographer's Eye.
Photographer's Eye, yeah, from MoMA exhibition, 1970s, where he's talking about the medium, and in fact I have a quote. Should I read it or not? I misquote him. What the photographer discovered, was talking about the early moments in the medium, that the gestures of the hand were infinitely various, and that the wall of the building and the sun was never twice the same. So that someone drawing a hand had to really focus on maybe one moment or point of view, and photography allows us to, it gives us access to the detail, the things that we don't notice.
seeping into the work in some way. I think that's something, like when we first visited your studio and saw like variations on still lifes, one of the questions was like, where did these pictures come from? And you're like, they're just objects that were on the shelf where I teach.
It's true.
And yet they've kind of made their way through this process and become these like really beautiful contemplative objects. And I guess, I mean, to go back to this idea of the tension between where something comes from and what it becomes, that transformation, it's kind of mysterious. And I think, you know, you've mentioned sort of your pictures as being about a sort of psychoanalytic take
Yeah.
on a personal archive.
That's the theory. Yeah, not in terms of pathology or analysis, but the idea of that in psychoanalytic theory that conscious has a topography, that it's a place, and it's a departure from what we see. So again, thinking about dialectic, observation versus hallucination, and I think about hallucination a lot.
Well,
I should check into that.
I think there's something like justifiable about that. You know, the quality of blue. Like I keep thinking about this quote by Merleau-Ponty in his writings about painting, describing the blue so blue only blood would be more red. And there are these moments in particularly this piece actually where it's so blue that there is a kind of it's hallucinatory. It's also like unbelievable in terms of rendering, kind of, and the fact that it's like embedded in the substrate, I think, plays on it. It really draws you in, and I think for all those characteristics go against the work as being sort of legible as a subject to be read. Again, sort of like a subject that's hidden.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my totally subjective reading of your work, but
No, I think, well, just thinking in terms of dialectics, but surface versus depth too. I mean, I think which is a age-old dilemma and question in representation. And photography oftentimes totally forgets that, like Myra was saying, color photography is invisible, and that's kind of why I needed to stop maybe making color photography. And I think I've always wanted to be a painter, but I don't. I like reality. I like observation too much. I don't want to spend all my time, depicting something in a very realistic way.
and yet you've built this entire studio around
Around this.
avoiding the color photograph.
Yeah.
That's kind of amazing. So, but I mean, not to go on too much, but like that, but that sort of subterranean approach, I think about it as being also materially present in your process, where you're making negatives and internegatives and enlargements and multiplications.
Thank you, Jackie.
I think that
Yeah.
goes into it.
Well, I get myself into this all the time. I come up with an idea and then it's so complicated to get to the finish line. I want to get up at various points along the way.
So,
Yeah.
it's amazing how it's first.
So.
So, I'll just kind of spiel quickly about the work that I have. The pictures I have here are also present in the show, with the exception of a few, but thinking along the lines of the process of excavation, where the landscape, where your work kind of was before the science head. This was kind of an early picture for me. It's quite old, but it's included in the show as part of this portfolio that is comprised of 20 prints made over the course of the last 10 years. And the title of the portfolio is Anachronic, which is sort of like the non-chronological order or sequence of events or things. And so thinking about that process and the excavation process, I included this picture that I made in a marble mine, which is I guess, evident from the picture, but it's also, I feel like, allegorical or symbolic of a process of experiencing the world. I work with a large format camera, like many of us, and just the process of that defamiliarization kind of changes your approach to the land and to the place, and this is kind of where I started, and it's in some significant way where I still am with how I engage, like where I get pictures. It's a kind of necessary blindness or an engagement of a blind spot of taking this apparatus into the world, in some senses blindly, and collecting imagery. So like all the pictures I'm showing you are quite long exposures. They're shot on film, still shooting on film. And in the portfolio anachronic, each picture deals in some way with like a photographic process. So what this picture is of is this defunct circuit board factory, and the red light on the top is produced by the screen that allowed them to coat circuit boards, which is a photographic process. So sort of ultimately this portfolio is like an archive, and the things that made the cut were sort of things that obliquely dealt with photographic processes, right? This is a picture in the show called The Presidential Moon, and it's, I sort of like the fact that the title, Greg mentioned this in his talk this morning, that there's not a whole lot of information accompanying this picture, and perhaps one doesn't need much. I mean, you know what you're looking at. Just in terms of trivia, like it's from the LBJ archive in Austin, Texas, where I spent like 7 years of my life, and I got really invested in going into archives and collections and making these long exposures of objects, arcana, strange things. This, again, was a picture that came out of that I felt like spoke to the history of the medium as much as the history of that particular archive. And the object was given to LBJ by a model maker from upstate New York, and it was based on photographs in 1969. So at that moment in history, it was sort of the most sophisticated model this person could make, or most accurate model they could make, and it was, you know, to commemorate the landing on the moon. But it's kind of a strange object, like it never really made it into LBJ's domestic life, and so it's too big for that, and too small sort of to be a trophy or to be a monument. So it sort of sits in the basement of this building, sort of forever in abeyance. You know, it's this commemorative object that goes nowhere. And its kind of counterpart is the White House switchboard, which was in use through the Clinton administration, but it went in. Unbelievable. I mean, actually, when you see the print, you can read the text on it. It's like Chelsea's bedroom and First Lady Mrs. Gore. But then there's also like the beauty salon from like 1972. So like,
how did this? Why is this in the LBJ archive? Did it come into? Maybe he installed it.
Yeah, it came into the White House when he was in office. So I guess that's one of the sort of strange curatorial fates of objects that, you know, accompany presidents and a sort of institution based on a biographical understanding of history. But yeah, there are a lot of strange things in there, like this is something he would give heads of state as sort of a PR tool, so they'd think of him first thing in the morning, last thing in the morning. And so, yeah. And it has, you know, the presidential seal on the front. But I got really interested in sort of both photographing these objects in situ, but then creating environments that seem to sort of speak to their physical nature and the sort of idiosyncrasies of LBJ, but also this idea of sort of an arbitrary archive, right? Because he's president, everything is kept. Like everything is kept. And sort of skipping over, I thought like that was maybe a good contextual project to position this picture, which is something that it's in Austin, and I lived there for a while before I even thought to go take a picture of it. In fact, I was just photographing at the Ransom Center and some of their vaults and some of the architecture is it's a really amazing place. And when I was leaving, I saw them like, you know, there's this famously like bulletproof looking container that it's in, like hyper protected. You can go online and see like the weather conditions in the chamber. But then I saw like a curator, he had opened the side door and it was like a carpeted like furniture or a carpeted like luggage key lock. It was like very unsophisticated. It just kind of gave me this idea about the strange kind of the appearance or the artifice of containment. And,
Well, this is also a very significant, did you actually?
oh right, yeah. So
What this is, pretty important.
yeah, it's the first photograph, right?
Yeah.
So it's viewed from the window at the Gras, 1826, alleged first photograph,
Which is-
first fix.
How do we pronounce that?
We were going to avoid that.
Nips.
Yes.
Nips. Sounds like something
It's
said
a backwards record, yeah.
Which is an interesting, I mean, the window, that the first photograph included the metaphor of looking out the window.
Right, yeah, that's a fortuitous.
And it's also a photograph that's hard, kind of like what Myra was describing with her, is it embryo types? All these types, embryo, and, but you could only see it from certain, like, strained angles. At this
Right,
point,
so at this, well, this is a 45-minute exposure of this thing. And so it's a really dark room. I mean, it's heavily kind of manipulated by the photographic process, which is maybe something like trying to see it when you're there because it's disappearing, right? And it's being preserved while it's disappearing, sort of graciously turning into nothing. So when you go in there, you have the experience of kind of constantly moving to see this image, which you mostly know from memory, as being the space between two buildings.
or mediated, in photo
Yeah.
history books, the image, I mean, it's the image of the rooftop, they're basically two geometric planes
Right.
intersecting, but it's that what we see in the book is not what presently exists.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's a really, really kind of good point.
I think about, well, just becoming more familiar with your work and mediation, and the apparatus seems to be important in,
Right,
the moon, I think, very much so.
yeah. I mean, I think the institutional signature, the one that sort of works to preserve while it sort of maybe forgets what its mission is. And that's not necessarily going on here, that's more the case in LBJ's domain, but I guess with this picture that the fact that it's the first photograph is a significant aspect of it, and then the sort of way that it's seen and the artifice around it and the length of exposure and the fact that you still can't see it all speak to an experience of the idea of origin, right?
Yeah.
But also, yeah, the institution. So this is like, this summer, I was in the show there with a group of other artists, 10 other artists, and we had curated pictures from the archive and put them with our own pictures, and it just so happened fortuitously that the first photograph was traveling to Mannheim at the same time for the first time, transatlantically since the Gernsheim collection collected it. And they asked, which would, in what I thought was a really ironic gesture for an institution, they asked that I put my picture in its place in the window. So the strange experience of making this picture was watching viewers come in expecting to see the first photograph and trying to figure out I mean, and I love that they did that as like an institution, I think.
And then you present in the room, making this
Right, I mean,
photograph.
it's really more meta than
Yeah,
than
it's
you want it to be. And that it's here now.
But I think also, also, not to keep bringing up Jeff Wall, but why not? But another thing that he said once that struck me was that, that photography isn't just about what it shows us, but he's starting to think more and more that it's about what it excludes. And this is, kind of curious in that sense, that there's, the mediated moment that the viewer really doesn't have access to
getting to know them personally. I think there's like a secret enjoyment on the part of everyone who works there. You know, the perversity of the archive. And I think it's not so much because it's actually, I mean, it's very evident at LBJ, you know, because you have two people watching it for this absurd collection of stuff. But
It's also where I think the largest collection of antiques exists.
yeah. Well, yeah, if you don't know, the HRC is actually the largest collection of photographs in the country, ranges. And they also have amazing manuscripts, like from Gutenberg Bible to David Foster Wallace's archive and Beckett's archive. I mean, it's a really amazing resource, and it's open to the public, and you can just make an appointment and they bring out things. Yeah, so it's sort of, there isn't a whole lot of irony, but I think there's comedy, you know, behind the scenes.
I don't know if you have anything to say about this, but you spoke about the length of your exposures a few times, 45 minutes in this case, and it occurred to me that the original was famously 8 hours.
Right.
The original. Can you elaborate on the significance of that in terms of your anachronic project?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's key to like me even wanting to make pictures is this extended slowness that they require. Like it's why I'm not really very interested in like the speed of digital imagery in terms of making, more in terms of editing. But I think having a relationship to time that is slowed down is why I use that camera. And it's also, it makes what you get a surprise. As strange as that seems, it's like you make a picture for 45 minutes, you really have no idea what the thing looked like because it was so dark, or what you're going to make it look like through your tools. And I don't know, I mean, it's interesting historically, like we've reached a point where this picture could be made in a quarter of a second or whatever, you know, and probably the resolution would be, I don't know, similar. I don't even want to speculate, but it's like the capabilities there to get rid of time, you know. But I really love that I have to endure the 45 minutes of like pacing, watching, stopping viewers from coming in.
Did you have to do that for that?
Yeah. In each case, it's like there's this time, right, where the film is being exposed and you have to do something. And I sort of love that it's like time on the mind, or you know, it's like you can't go anywhere, you can't think about doing something else, you just have to wait.
John, could you describe a little bit the actual boxes and the light and how you make the cyanotypes? I was fascinated. I mean, I've read a ton about the process, but I've never actually seen them made, so it's super interesting.
Well, it's probably familiar to a lot of people here, but I did have to modify a lot of principles that already exist in terms of equipment design. I had to build an exposure unit that, well, first of all, I had to figure out how to get the image on the linen, and I thought, well, I'll just soak linen in cyanotype and press the negative and make the exposure, and it'll be nice and easy. And of course, it was a horrible result. So I had to develop a system where the panels are pre-stretched. So it's almost like preparing individual pieces of photographic paper. So the 4 by or 3 by 4 feet panels, I had to make maybe 3 of them in anticipation for most likely only 1 of them turning out. So, so I have to stretch it first, and it's kind of like a big UV oven that has I have to fill the cavity underneath the stretched panel with foam, and the negative gets pressed very tightly against the surface, and so there's a huge labor production involved in just getting the smallest result, and which I did not anticipate, and which I built all this equipment kind of not testing it, and then I had an exhibition that was like 2 months away, and about 2 weeks into doing this, I it's one of the things I think that's symbolically wonderful, kind of wonderful about is just the simplicity and the elegance of the process. It's just oxidation of ferric salts, but it's developed in water. That's the only thing that brings the image into being. It's just exposing the salt to light, and it oxidizes, attaches itself to the substrate, rinses away, get the blue. But yeah, so, I wish I had pictures of the studio. It wasn't a torture device.
Beautiful exposure